reason you might want to study law is because you think that you might want to be a lawyer down the line, and indeed that is what the majority of our students do. But there's no inherent connection between the two. In this country, unusually, you can study something else for a degree and then do a conversion course and go on and become a lawyer nonetheless. Or conversely, if you do a law degree and then you decide midstream that actually law is perhaps not for you and you want to do a different career, that is totally fine too. And if I think back over the people I've taught at Pembroke over the years, I've taught vicars, I've taught school teachers, I've taught people who go and work for NGOs or charities or into the policy sector, you name it. I've had students who've gone and done it, journalism as well, all sorts of different things they've gone off to do. So there's no reason why you're not constraining yourself to do law just by doing a law degree. And one of the reasons why it's a great degree to do, even if you're not really 100% sure what it is that you might do at the end of that, is because a law degree gives you incredibly good transferable skills which you can use pretty much in all walks of life. So what are those transferable skills? Well, the first one is the ability to read huge quantities of information very quickly, digest it, analyse it, and think about it. You might think, well, in the age of AI, isn't ChatGPT going to do all of that for me? Well, no, on two levels. One, because we know that you need to be able to do it as well, so that you can check even if you use a system to help you, you can check what that system is outputting, and you need to be able to do it as well. And secondly, because it's important to keep using those skills even if you're automating them. So you might well cycle everywhere, but it's good to be able to walk there too sometimes, just in case that's what you need to be able to do. So it's still a very valuable thing to be able to do. Similarly, writing very effectively, that's something you get a lot of practice at. And again, yes, you might in future use systems to help you with that, but you want to be able to say, yeah, that's not exactly what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say is something a little bit more specific or focused or nuanced than that. And that ability to write really effectively and really convincingly is also something that we will teach you how to do. And the third thing is something which you can't get from anywhere else, and that is the ability to think for yourself. So we will teach you what the law is, but we will spend our whole time saying to you, yeah, but what do you think about it? Should that be what the law is? Would you reform the law if it was you? If there's a 3-2 split in the Supreme Court on a decision, which side would you have been on? Would you have been with the majority or with the minority? Why would you have made that decision? So we want you all the time through your degree to think really critically and analytically about what it is that you're learning. We'll also teach you the ability to make really fine logical distinctions so that you can go, yeah, I know those two scenarios look similar and sort of superficially they are, but there is a subtle difference between them which should have an impact in terms of how we treat those two different sets of facts. And that ability to spot those differences and think, okay, how does that difference translate into a way of treating that scenario differently? That's something else that we'll teach you to be able to do. And we'll also teach you to think about how rules work in practice. How do rules make people behave? Sometimes they can have entirely the opposite effect of what you're intending. It's a famous study where they started fining people for doing something, and it actually made them more prepared to do it. Because like, oh, great, I could pay for it now. I don't even feel guilty anymore. Terrific. So you've got to be very aware of how your rules are actually going to operate in the real world. And if you create a particular incentive, what is that going to do? So all of these skills are things we will teach you using legal materials, but you could take them off and you could apply them to anything. It could be sales figures that you're analysing and writing about. You could be thinking about how to incentivise people to use more green energy or use more public transport. Whatever it might be that you do in future, that set of skills is a really useful and transferable set of skills that you can take off whatever it is that you want to do after you leave us. So that's why you might want to think about doing a law degree. Why might you want to think about doing that degree at Oxford? Well, if you just remember one thing about this talk, the top line would be the thing to remember. We do everything here at the absolute best level of quality that we can possibly achieve. So my colleagues and I, we do world-leading, cutting-edge research in our fields, which we share with our students in the process of our teaching. The students that we have, by definition, are selected as being the brightest and most able people that we came across from the whole of the world that applied to us. And so your colleagues, when you're here, your friends and the people that you're on course with will be people who are really able, really smart, really exciting people to be around. And that in turn will stretch you and help you to achieve the absolute maximum of your potential. Unsurprisingly, you put all of those amazing things together and we get amazing quality out the other end. And employers know that. They are falling over themselves to employ our students because they know how well taught they are, how able they are. They know the environment that they've been in for the last 3 or 4 years and how good that makes them in terms of being future employees. As I say, around 75% of our law graduates do go on to join the legal profession, but those who don't, it's not because they couldn't, it's because they didn't want to. They did want to take one of those other career paths that I was mentioning before. While you're here, you'll have access to some of the world's leading scholars. So I always say you can go anywhere and read the textbook. If you come here, there's a fair chance you'll be taught by the person who wrote the textbook. And you will have that access, at the very least in this sort of context, to somebody who you can then email afterwards and say, can I just talk to you about what you were saying this morning? I'd really like to just go into that in a bit more detail. But it can be much more individual. We do teach in 2s or 3s and so on, as I'll say a little bit more about in a moment. So you have really, really direct access to people who are working in the cutting edge of their fields, and they will share that work with you. They'll often talk to you about work they haven't published yet, which they're working on at the moment, which they're thinking through, and they'll talk to you about that in your teaching sessions. So you really have access to some amazing tutors while you're here, and they really care about their teaching. We've all chosen to work in a very individual teaching setting, and that's because we really like doing it, and we really want you to thrive and succeed as well. We are probably the only leading law school in the world, therefore, which does have that as our main method of course delivery. Our main form of teaching you will be in what we call the tutorial system, which is basically you and maybe 2 other students in a room for an hour once a week or once every other week to talk about the subject that you've been studying and the work that you've been doing and the written work that you've produced on that particular topic. It's usually 2 students and a tutor if you have particular needs, or some colleges just prefer to teach one-on-one. Obviously, if you're on a cohort of 9 and there's usually pairs, there's going to have to be 1-3 because the maths don't work, so you might find that you're in a group of 3, but by and large it will be 2 students and 1 tutor for most tutorials, and so they get to really know you. They can write you amazing references at the end because they really know your strengths and weaknesses, and again, employers know that, and so there's one law firm that phones us up rather than asking for written references because they know how well we know our students and we can talk to them about that. So it's an incredibly valuable, really intensive, really individual way of teaching people, and it means we know each of you as an individual person and how to bring on your strengths and help you overcome your weaknesses. And the other thing, if you have a bit of time afterwards and you can pop upstairs and see the Bodleian Law Library, that is really one of the jewels in Oxford's crown. And it has, as the slide says, more than 40,000 law-related items, which is more than almost any other comparable library in the UK. If you publish on law in the UK, by law, you have to deposit a copy with the library. It's a copyright library, so it automatically gets a copy of every single book related to law that's published in the UK, but it has a huge international connection as well. And of course, what you see upstairs these days is only the tip of the iceberg, because that's the physical collection. And of course, there's also a huge range of electronic resources. So wherever you are in the world, if you go back home to a different country for the vacation or whatever it might be, you still have access to that absolutely enormous selection of resources through the online portals with your Oxford single sign-on. The librarians are also amazing people. It's not just the physical resources, it's also the people who run it. They are amazing. I've never found anything they couldn't get hold of for you, and they're so nice and they're so willing to help, and what they really want is to help students do their legal research, learn as much as they possibly can. So the librarians are also an amazing aspect of the library as well. So by all means, pop up and see it. Say hello to them while you're here. So those are all the good things. You're thinking, oh, well, this still sounds great, but you've got some buts in the back of your head because there's other people who've said things to you, or you've read things, or there's just this sort of general sense that maybe it's not all that great, and there are some things that you are maybe a bit worried about. And these are by and large not things to be worried about, and that's why I'm very glad to talk to you today. So one of the things people sometimes think is that Oxford is somehow more expensive than other universities. Well, it's not. The fees for Oxford are no more than they are for any other university, but because we know this is a potential problem for people, and because our alumni know this is a potential problem for people, what we do have is an extensive range of bursaries and forms of financial support. So general financial support for sort of living and so on, but also specific financial support because you need to travel somewhere or you need to buy a particular book or whatever it might be. There's also more specific forms of support. So what I've put on there is the link to the university's bursaries, but because there's always these 2 layers, the college and the university, your college will also have access to bursaries and forms of financial support. And there are usually money in those pots that is not spent at the end of the year. So it really should never be a sort of financial barrier to people coming here. And if you feel like it is a financial barrier and you would like to come here and you could otherwise come here, but there is something financial which is stopping you, please get in touch, because that shouldn't and won't be the case. If we work with you, we can fix that. So don't let that stand in your way. You may also think that people from state schools are in the minority here. That is definitely not true. So there's every sort of couple of years we publish rolling data on the university's admissions, and the most recent set of stats has just come out, so that link on the bottom of the slide, if you want to dig into our stats. I am a massive data nerd, so I love things like this. So if you want to do that as well, then you can dig into those stats and see in more detail. But it's some sort of headlines. 76.6% of UK students admitted to undergraduate law between 21 and 23 were from the state school sector. That's bigger than the university average, which is 67.6. And if you just look at post-16 state school in the UK, 82.5%. Between 21 and 23, 79.5% were from the UK and 20.5% were from outside the UK, because that's the other thing to say, is that we're an incredibly international community here. So we're not just diverse in terms of the UK, we're also diverse in terms of the world at large. And really the people you are on course with, the people you will get to be friends with, are people from literally all over the world. 21 to 23, in that reporting period, 23% of our UK students were from areas which are defined as being the most disadvantaged in the UK. If you're used to the ACORN system, that's ACORN 4 and 5. And 22.9% of our students come from areas which are known for having low numbers of people progressing to university. Again, if you're familiar with the terminology, that's Polar 1 and 2. And 8.9% of our students are eligible for free school meals. This means that across the university, in that data I was talking about before, we were second for ACORN 4 and 5. 34.6% of students in that period were from BME backgrounds, so that was more than it was in the last reporting period before that. And 7% of UK students were UK domiciled with Black African or Black Caribbean heritage, which is the highest rate of any across the university. There are two really important things for you to know about how we've got to that data and how we've ended up in a situation where that data reflects us. One is that we're not sitting around going, oh, well, that's all very marvellous, isn't it? We're not doing anything else. No, we are continuing to improve. I said before I am a massive data nerd. We look constantly at the data of who's coming in, how they're doing on course, what we could do better, what we could do more of. And I personally will not rest until I think we have got the 240 best placed people across the entire world coming to do law at Oxford each year. You would expect the 240 people to be distributed really evenly across the country and across the world, and I will keep working until I've achieved that. You would not expect them to all come, you would not expect them to all be born on a Tuesday, you would not expect them all to come from certain areas, and if they are pooling, then we know that we've got that wrong and we need to go more diverse. So that's the other thing you need to know, is that we do this by looking for excellence. It's excellence first, and if you take the most excellent people, they will naturally be a diverse cohort of people. We never take people just because they fulfil a particular characteristic, and we never exclude people just because they don't have a particular form of characteristic. So to listen to parts of the press, you would think that we automatically admitted people with certain backgrounds, or we automatically binned the applications for certain backgrounds, particularly certain school types. That would not fit with what I was saying about being the most excellent we can be. That would be an incredibly two-dimensional, really silly way of going about it. What we do is we have an incredibly complex, data-driven system which looks contextually at everybody's application, or as much as we possibly can, and we can do so more for home students than we can for international students. And what we look at is not just your raw results, but we say, well, how do those results compare to other people in your situation, either in your school or in your area? So that might not be like the most absolutely best result, but for your area or your school, that's the absolutely top result anybody got. That's a really useful piece of data, and we have that data as well as the absolute score. So that's how we do it, by looking more and more carefully at our data to see which data is the really helpful, valuable data that is telling us how people will go on to do on course and who are the people who are going to thrive. So it's really not about do you tick a particular box or not tick a particular box. It's much more careful, scientific and subtle than that. Other things you might think about is that it might put other universities off if you apply to Oxford. Well, there is no way that they can tell from your UCAS form that you have. You don't have to say anything in your personal statement about Oxford. I'll say more about personal statements later, but you don't need to refer to Oxford at all. And all any university can see of your UCAS form is what relates to them. So I can't tell where else you've applied, and they can't tell that you've applied to me. So there's no way for any university to see anything that doesn't relate to them. That's the only bits of the UCAS form that pull through to a particular university. Does it depend which college you apply to? Well, we have worked really hard with our data over the past 5 or 6 years, so that as much as possible, the answer to that question is now no. All the reforms, everything we've done to our admissions system over the past few years has been about getting to no on that answer. There are 2 reasons for this. One is that you can make an open application. So if you've been around the colleges today and you think, yeah, I'd love to do law at Oxford, but I don't really mind which college I go to, great, make an open application, and the system will then allocate you to a college that needs more applicants. It won't allocate you to one of the ones that's already oversubscribed for that particular year. So that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is that even if you apply to the oversubscribed college, we may well take your application and move it somewhere else. We centralise the process of shortlisting to a very large extent now, so that what we're trying to end up with is the best people spread out being interviewed across Oxford somewhere, regardless pretty much of where they applied, because we think that's the fairest and the best way to make sure we get the best slice of people across Oxford as a whole. So I would also say, if you've been around the colleges and completely fallen in love with one, that's great, but don't get too attached to it. Because you might apply to Oxford and you might apply to that college and you might get an email saying, great, but you're actually going to be interviewed at College 2 instead, not the College 1 that you'd applied to. And then you're interviewed at College 2 and then you're subsequently interviewed by another college, College 3. And then you might get an email saying, actually, thank you, great, we're going to accept you, but we're going to accept you at College 4. Or you might get an email saying, we will take you in Oxford and we'll tell you which college it's going to be in August. And that's because we are constantly doing this business of shuffling the best people across Oxford. What we don't want is College A to be rejecting better people than College B is taking. We want to make sure those top people are taken across the board, and then we'll find a home for them somewhere across one of the colleges. So I can say more about that if you want to in the Q&A. And because we're doing this business of shuffling and multiple interviewing at different colleges, more than half of our candidates usually are seen by more than one college during the process of the interview process. So, other things. Is Oxford all formal and stuffy? Well, yeah, some things definitely are. So when you graduate, you will look like those people in the top picture, and you will graduate in the building that's in the picture right underneath it. When you first arrive, and sometimes when you do exams, you will wear that uniform, that black and white uniform of the picture in the bottom middle, which we call sub-fusk. And the other picture is a picture of the outside of my office, one of there's a brown bay window in the roof. That's my office at Pembroke, in a very old and very beautiful building. So yes, for sure, there are lots of old traditional things about Oxford. What we generally find is that if we try to modernise those things, it is the students who object the most. Because the way people see this is that they have earned the right to carry on that tradition. They are now part of that tradition, and they have earned the right to wear those slightly odd clothes and do those slightly odd things, and you are not going to take it off them, because they are really proud of that heritage and really proud of the fact that they now belong to that tradition and it's theirs as well. So in as much as we do have those very old-fashioned traditions, our students very much own them, and as I say, get very protective and very defensive of them, and you won't take them off them. Of course, not everything is old-fashioned either, so our sports facilities are really good. I mentioned the Bodleian Law Library. That's a picture from one of the balconies in the Bodleian Law Library. The 2 corner pictures are of St Catherine's round the corner, which is an entirely modern build college, so some colleges are exclusively 20th century build. And even the old colleges, so that twilight picture, that's the new build bit of my college. So you saw the old bit of my college before, that's the new build bit of Pembroke with its bridge in that twilight picture. And you'll find that as well, that even the older colleges which have older buildings, most of them have a new build quad as well. That means if you have particular accessibility needs, or you need there to be a lift or an ensuite bathroom or any of these kinds of things, colleges will have those usually in their new build bits as well as their old traditional bits. So Oxford really is what you make of it. The more you put into your studies, the more your tutors in those tutorials will help you get out of them. Similarly, if you play a sport, or you dance, or you like drama, or you're into political activism, or I don't know what it is, you will find other people who do that thing as well, and they too will want to help you do that as much as possible to the highest level possible. So the more you put in, the more you try out, the more you will get out of being here. It is also the case, as I said before, that our students have all sorts of nationalities and backgrounds in all possible senses. It's great when people first arrive in October because you've got this cohort of sort of 6 or 8 really diverse, really different individuals to get to know over the next 3 years, which is just brilliant and one of the best bits of my job. So from that point of view, there is no such thing as a typical Oxford student. If you've got a kind of mental image of one, scrap it because it isn't there. But that said, there is a typical Oxford student, and they are people who have really high academic potential and a really huge love of learning. So if you're the sort of person who would not admit this in public at your school, and I was definitely that person, who really, really likes learning but just thinks that's a bit odd, when you come here, you are surrounded by other people who also really like learning, including us, the academics who teach you. And so that's really something we're looking for. Are you passionate about your subject? Do you actually genuinely get out of bed thinking, I'm really looking forward to reading some more stuff today? If you do, this is definitely the place for you. And that's what it is that makes a typical Oxford student, is the ability and the love of learning. So in terms of what your course will look like, that's what it is. That's a sort of map of it. So you arrive in the autumn term of your first year. We call that Michaelmas term. And through that term and the spring term up to Easter, which we call Hilary term, you will study 3 subjects: criminal law, constitutional and Roman. And you might be thinking, how is she telling me that this is a very up-to-date university and telling me that I've got to study Roman law in my first year? 2 answers to that. One is that what Roman law shows you is what law does in a society. It's a really nice case study in why do we have law and what does it do in society. And you can see the role that law played in that ancient civilization. And what it did is things like stopping people having to fight violently over issues, because it gave them a system for resolving their disputes. It gave them a set of rules to apply to work out what happens if my sheep get mixed with your sheep, what do we do, and this kind of thing. It shows you how you can protect certain kinds of property in a way that supports the economy so that people can transact with them. So it's a really good case study introduction to this is what law does in the world, and it's still doing some of those things today, so many years on. It's also good because most of your degree will be focusing on the common law system that we have in the UK and in Canada and America and Australia and New Zealand and so on. Whereas if you ever want to study European or continental European system, or indeed Scottish law as well, they are based on the civilian Roman tradition. So even if you don't use it for a few years, just having that in the background, in the back of your head, yes, you've got an introduction to a civilian system. It doesn't look completely alien to you when you come across it in practice. And of course, if you're doing course 2, you'll come across it a lot sooner than that. So it also gives you that sort of foundation in what a civilian system works like alongside all of the Commonwealth systems that you're doing. Do some exams which we call law mods, moderations, at Easter of your first year, and then you come back for the summer term, which we call Trinity term, and from that term onwards, right the way through your second year, you then study a series of subjects: contract, tort, land. Tort is things like negligence and trespass. Land, jurisprudence, which is legal philosophy. Administrative law, that's things like judicial review, and trusts law. And then in your final year, you will study EU law and 2 optional subjects as well. And the range of options is huge. You can go back and do more legal philosophy if you want, more advanced Roman law if you want, more advanced criminal law if you want, or you can do brand new things: medical law, family law, competition law, intellectual property, all sorts of different things you can do. So you have those options in your final year. As I said before, our main method of course delivery is that central one. So usually 2, sometimes 1 or 3 students in a room with a tutor. You'll get what's called a reading list. You go away and do the reading. There's usually a written piece of work that you have to do, an essay or what we call a problem question, where you apply the law to some facts. You do that, you hand it in, and then you go to the tutorial, and the tutor can talk through with you anything you were confused about, anything you'd like to know more about. They can talk to you about your written work and how it could have got higher marks and how it could be improved. And you will do that usually 8 times for each of the subjects that I had on that previous slide. They will typically happen either every week or every other week. So you might have an intensive term where you have 2 subjects a week, and then a quieter term where you just have 1. Or you might have a term where you do 1 subject every week and 1 subject every other week, and then the next term you do the other half of that every other week subject. So it averages out that you will have 3 over every 2 weeks, 3 tutorials over every 2 weeks, or sort of 1.5 average every week. Some tutors also run classes. I do that, where I get all the people I'm going to do tutorials with. At the beginning of the week, I get them together in a class and we go through the basics, which then means I'm sort of freed up so that I can spend those tutorials doing more advanced things, more individual, personalised things, because I know that I've already done a kind of coverage of the basics at the beginning of the week. Not all tutors do those. When they do them, they're compulsory, but as I say, they won't always happen. And then lectures take place usually here for all of those core subjects that are non-optional, that everybody studies. And so they will be open to, as many students as want to come to them. But the really unusual thing about Oxford is that those lectures are the icing on the cake. They're not the cake. Because the tutorial is our main method of delivery, lectures are optional. If you go and you find them useful, you keep going. If you go and you think, actually, I prefer learning on my own in my room, you do that. It's entirely up to you. So it's a very sort of self-driven, self-organised course here. There will be regular contact hours, at least one a week, usually 2 or 3 a week. But beyond that, it is up to you what you do. So that's our ordinary law course. We also have, as you probably know, course 2, and that means that those pictures I had on the previous slide take place in years 1, 2 and 4 of your degree. So the sort of first year subjects, then the grey circle, and then the EU and options take place in the 4th year. And in between, you go abroad for a year, and you can go to France, to Paris, to Germany, to Bonn or Munich, Italy to Siena, Spain to Barcelona, or the Netherlands to Leiden. And of those, the odd one out is Leiden, because you don't need a language for that one. That's European law in English, whereas for all of the others, it's the law of that system in the language of that system. So there is a language requirement to go to any of the others. If you want to apply to course 2, please do use the correct UCAS code. So those are the codes that you might need, and put that on your form. But you can apply to more than one of them. So if you put your sort of top choice down, your first choice one down, and then if you're invited for interview, get in touch with the college that's invited you and say, I'd like to be considered for German law as well, please. And they will then arrange both a French, say, and a German test for you during the process of your application. So if you want to apply to more than one, and if you get invited for interview, just contact the college that has invited you for interview and let them know that you'll need more than one language test, or that you want to be considered for more than one version of course 2. And that's absolutely fine, we can do that. Now, the key thing to say is that this doesn't affect your chances of getting in. If you apply to course 2, you are also considered for the ordinary law course, and this is why that happens. The first decision we make in the first week, usually of December, is which are the 240-odd people who are going to come and study law at Oxford. That's question number 1, and we lock that in, and then we say, right, now, of those 240 people, which of them applied to course 2? And then we see whether we've got enough course 2 places for them. So there might be a second mini competition for, are you just coming to do plain law, or are we going to be able to add the law with French law or law with German law or whatever it is on the top of that? So your chances of getting in across Oxford generally to do law are exactly the same as everybody else, and that is our first decision that we make. And only when we've made that decision do we then go on and think about adding course 2 to it or not. That means that when you're here for interview, your law interviewers will say to you, are you happy to be considered for plain law for course 1 as well? And that's not a sign of how you're doing. That's not an indication that that's what they're going to do. It's nothing like that. We literally have to ask it of everybody, because we need to know that if we say, actually, in your case, we're just going to offer you course 1, not course 2, that's going to be fine, and we need to know whether that's the case. And again, whatever answer you give is fine, but it won't affect your chances of getting in to either course 1 or course 2, whatever you say about that. We just need to know whether it's worth making you that offer for plain law if we decide at stage 2 not to add the language to it. So, in this application process, when we're selecting people, what are we looking for? Well, definitely reasoning ability. Can you think quickly? Are you sensitive to subtle differences in language? Are you somebody who's good at analysing things, taking them apart, putting them back together again? Can you explain your thought processes to us? So that doesn't mean, can you use the most long words ever? Are you incredibly fluent and sound really erudite? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means, can you explain things to people so that they can understand you? So if you're saying, no, but I think there's a difference between those two things, can you explain to us so that we can understand what you think that difference is? That's all it is. Very common sense. And finally, like I was saying before, we are looking for people who genuinely love learning. You are somebody who is motivated, you concentrate and you like concentrating for long periods of time, you're really motivated to do well, and you're really enthusiastic about your course. That's something else that we very much look for. How do we look for that? Well, we will look at your exam results to date. So for a home student, that's your GCSEs. But as I said before, we contextualise those GCSEs, and we do so in two different ways. We have two different contextualised scores that we can use for GCSEs. So I always say that we look at GCSEs in kind of three dimensions: the absolute results and then the two contextualised results as well. If you don't have any results to date because you're in an international system, the LNAT is going to be particularly important for you. If you do have results but they're not GCSEs, I can't off the top of my head tell you what the equivalence is, but we do have a sort of table of equivalences, and we can do that, and I can always do it if you contact us by email or afterwards. Your reference is something that we will look at as well, and in particular one of the things we're looking for there is anything which might affect those data points that we're looking at. So, were there any mitigating circumstances through your GCSEs or equivalents, or when you were sitting the LNAT, that we need to be aware of, because we need to take that into account in assessing those data points. We will look at your personal statement, but not a huge amount, and I will say more about that later. That really doesn't play a very big role in our selection process at all for this particular university. If we invite you to interview, we've got at least 2 25-minute walking, talking personal statements, so we don't really need the written version. We will also, alongside your results to date, the other thing we look at a lot is the LNAT, the Law National Admissions Test, and I'll say more about that in a minute. And it's really your results to date plus the LNAT which decide whether or not you're going to be invited for interview, and if you are, then obviously the interview plays a really big role in whether we go on to select you afterwards. So the personal statement, as I say, really, really plays a very minimal role. I know people spend ages on them. I know schools are very excited about them. We really aren't, I promise you. Not least because we don't exactly know where they've come from always. There is no formula, so don't feel that you need to follow a formula. If your school is telling you have to follow a formula, well, not for us, you don't, definitely not. If you're going to use a statement, use it to tell us about you. So that's a way of sort of just giving a little bit more depth and interest to the application. We won't really look at it until we get to the point of thinking about making you an offer. So that's the point at which it plays a role. When you've had your interview, you've made it through, and you've been selected for interview, and you've had your interview, and the college is kind of thinking, yeah, I think this person's looking quite plausible. I might well make this person an offer. One of the things they might look for at that point is just, are you doing something else? There is a huge jump, which I cannot overestimate, between schoolwork and university work. So if you've got somebody who says, yes, I'm doing my schoolwork, and yes, it's obviously at a really high level because, my grades are all really excellent, but I also, work in my parents' business, pick my little brother up from school every day, care for an elderly relative, do volunteering, climb mountains, run races, I don't know what it might be in your spare time. That shows us that, yeah, you're doing your schoolwork, but you're totally on top of it. You've got spare capacity. You're not going to find the big jump to university is going to be too much for you. You've got that room to expand. You're not really stretched to the limit by what you're doing at the moment, and that's a good sign for us. It also shows us that you can manage your time, and as I say, we've got a very self-driven course here, so you will need to be on top of your time and be good at sort of organising yourself, diarising things, not letting people down. So it helps us a bit with that as well. So right at the very last, when we're sort of thinking, yes, it's a kind of good check that we can look at that in your application and think, yeah, and they'll be fine with that as well. I wanted to give them an offer. I've checked that. I think that's going to be fine. But that really is the only role it plays. It doesn't do any more than that. So it doesn't matter what you've written beyond that. It's not going to do you any more or less good than that. The other thing, as I say, is that we want to know any problems that you have had. So if you think any of your data points that we're otherwise going to be looking at are affected by anything that's happened to you, please make sure through your personal statement and through your teachers that we know that, because then we'll take that into account and we'll say, well, yes, it was a bit of a wobbly LNAT, but, if they were throwing up all the way through the test, fair enough, and we will take that into account and not use your wobbly LNAT to disqualify you necessarily. So we need to know that kind of counterbalancing information. Going to tell us something about yourself, some experience you've had or something you've read, tell us why that helped and was important. Don't just go, yes, I've ticked a whole load of boxes, I was told to read these books and I've read them. Say, I read this book and this was what it showed me, or this is what I got out of it, or this is why I feel encouraged by it, or whatever it might be. So there's just a bit more to your application. But as I say, really the personal statement, I can't underplay enough what a role it plays, because it really doesn't play a very big role at all. So the admissions process, the really important thing is that date. Please do, yes, make a note of that date, because the UCAS form deadline is the 15th of October. If we make you an offer, it will be a standard 3As. So you have to be predicted 3As or there's some equivalents on the side. And again, we can get you other equivalents if something different applies to you. Please make sure your teachers are going to predict that, because if they don't, we cannot take your application any further. And I know some schools deliberately underpredict and have incentives to underpredict people's A-levels. But if they do that and they don't predict you 3As, we cannot shortlist you. So if you think that is going to happen, copy me in on an email to your head of sixth form or head of year or whatever it is and say, please don't do that to me in this instance because you will disqualify me, because it will. So we need you to be predicted our minimum offer or the standard offer that we make for everybody and everything. We need you to be predicted that, or we can't consider your application. So please make sure that's the case. As I say, there's some there, and that is the standard offer we make in all circumstances to everybody, so we have to know that you're capable of hitting that. LNAT, I mentioned before, this is a really important part of shortlisting, and one of the reasons it's important is because we have it for everybody. That three-dimensional contextualised GCSE, that's great if we have those, but we don't have those for everybody, and we don't have them internationally. So particularly for international students, the LNAT is the one thing that we have for every single applicant, and that's why it's really important. It has two components, as you probably know, 42 multiple choice questions, so that's close reading and analysis and comprehension of 12 passages, and then a very short essay for 40 minutes. There's not much you can do. The whole point of it is to test your innate skills, not your preparation, so there's not a lot you can do. I would, though, be familiar with the platform. Things like once you've clicked out of the multiple choice, you can't go back. So if you go from multiple choice into essay, you can't go back again. Just make sure you know that from familiarity before you get into the real thing, that kind of thing. So have a go at the past ones that they have on the website. Be familiar with the platform. That's really all you can do to prepare for it. The other key things are the other sort of technical details of the LNAT. Please make sure that you take it by the 15th of October, so between the 1st of September and the 15th of October. To do that, you have to register for a slot. To guarantee you will get a slot before the 15th of October, you have to register by the 15th of September. Otherwise, we can't guarantee that you'll get a slot. And if no LNAT, again, I'm really sorry, we can't consider your application. So if I were you, when test slots open on the 1st of August, that's when I'd book my test slot. Then you know it's done. You know you're doing it in the right time period. You know we'll have the results by the 15th of October. You are all good. So do that, and then make sure that you take your passport or whatever it is when you go to sit the test. This is the other really crucial thing. You will see posters of this everywhere. Please, please, please tick the box that says that Oxford can see your LNAT results. If you do that, it comes through automatically. We match it automatically to your name, and then we have your whole application, UCAS form, LNAT result, all done. Really straightforward, automated. If you don't tick that box, we will get your application and we will think you have no LNAT. Emma once didn't sleep for 3 days because she was tracking down lost LNATs, because she was saying, we haven't got an LNAT, and the student was saying, well, I did sit one, and we had to go around looking for them by hand. Please don't do that to Emma. Please don't do that to yourself. Make sure you tick that box, and then it comes through automatically. If you want to check for any reason, you can always email us and say, can I just check that you've got both of them? But it will come through automatically if you tick the box. So please, please tick that Oxford can see your LNAT results, and then it will come through automatically to us. If you don't, we will look for it. We will chase you up. We will try and find it, but I cannot guarantee that we'll be able to do that because we don't control the whole of LNAT. So it's really, really important that you do that. So LNAT and any results that you have contextualised, if we can, are what go into deciding that you're going to get an interview. If you come for interview, so at that point when people are first applying, we get about 8.3 applications per place. But if you do get invited for interview, your odds have really improved a lot, because at that point it's basically 2.5 people per place that we interview, so that your chances of getting in are much higher at that point. All interviews take place online at the moment, and also in December, so usually the first week of December. You will almost certainly get 2 interviews at the first college that's invited you for interview, but like I was saying before, more than 50% of people go on to have a second interview at another college later in the week as well. So that's very likely to happen to you, and that's part of that shuffling process to make sure that we take the best 240 people who've come through our doors generally. If you want to know more about how Oxford interviews work, then there is an Oxford Law interview that you can watch online. My friend Imogen and Jeremiah are doing a great job of a mock interview for you to watch. It's very like what real interviews are like. You don't need to know anything. We're not going to test anything. We know some of you are doing A-level law, some of you aren't. We will deliberately test things nobody's come across before, so don't worry about that. We just want to know, like I said before, can you reason logically? Can you use your common sense? Can you explain why you think maybe the same rule doesn't apply in more than one circumstance? Can you be careful and precise in your use of language? And you will find that you say something and the interviewers go, are you sure? And you go, no, actually, I'm not. I think that's wrong, isn't it? And we just want to see that thought process. We want to see how you reason through, and you won't get the right answer first time, but we want to see how you reason through and how your brain works. I sort of say to people, if I could just look at the brain, that's what I'm trying to do in an interview. I'm not interested in anything else. I just want to see how people's brains are working, and that's what the interview is about. So, again, you can't really prepare for the interview. Hopefully you are somebody where if something about the law is on the news, something about the Supreme Court or maybe the assisted dying bill that's going through at the moment, something like that that's legally related, hopefully you do think, oh, that's interesting, I'll just read a bit more about that. But we're not going to sit you down and go, right, tell me exactly what the assisted dying bill says. No, we're not going to do that. And again, hopefully you are the sort of person who, when you hear a politician on the radio or, you see somebody interviewed or whatever it is, you think, that's not right. I don't think that makes any sense. You said that, but that doesn't follow from what you were saying before. If you have got that sort of brain, again, that's really good. You can't really prepare for it, but the more you are used to thinking, is that right? Do I agree with that? I don't think I would say that. The more you do that sort of thought process, the better placed you'll be to be able to handle those interviews where that's exactly the kind of thing that we do ask you to do. So, we are very glad that you are here. It's really good to see you, and it's really good to be able to tell you what the situation actually is. We are aware that there is a huge amount of misinformation out there, and I am very keen on these days to counter that. So, yes, there is more information available online. There is also more information available via our email addresses, which are on that slide and elsewhere. So please do get in touch with us if you have any questions after today. We'd much rather talk to your teachers, sort out any problems that you might be having with your application. We'd much rather do that than find somebody didn't apply and it was a soluble problem. So most problems are soluble. Please do get in touch with us and we can talk to you